You stand in the shadow of massive stone columns, the air thick with dust that burns your lungs. All around you, workers swing hammers against ancient walls, the sound echoing like thunder through empty halls. Each blow erases another face, another name, another history carved in stone. The year is 1334 BC, and the man they're destroying, the Pharaoh who married his own daughters, is being systematically removed from existence, as if he never lived at all. But 18 years earlier, this same man stood as the most powerful ruler on earth. He gazed upon the sun and declared that everything Egypt believed for 3,000 years was a lie. His name was Akhenaten, and what he did to secure his throne, what he did to his own children, would horrify even a civilization that had seen everything. Before we go deeper into this story, I'd genuinely love to know where in the world you're watching from. It's extraordinary to me that we're exploring these ancient truths together, connected across continents by our shared fascination with what humans are capable of. The transformation began quietly enough. In 1353 BC, a teenage prince named Amenhotep IV ascended to the throne of Egypt. His father had ruled for 38 years of unprecedented prosperity, leaving behind temples that glittered with gold and a kingdom that stretched across the known world. The young pharaoh should have been content to follow the path his ancestors had walked for millennia. But something burned within him. Perhaps it was the intensity with which he gazed upon the morning sun as it rose over the Nile. Perhaps it was whispers he heard in dreams. Or perhaps it was something darker, a vision of power that required a kind of sacrifice the world had never seen. The court at Thebes in those early years was a glittering spectacle of ancient tradition. The temple of Karnak alone employed thousands, its treasury overflowing with tribute from conquered lands. The high priest of Amun wielded influence that rivaled the pharaoh himself. Into this ancient world stepped a young man who would challenge everything. Contemporary records describe Amenhotep IV as physically distinctive in ways that unsettled those who looked upon him. Tall and lanky with an elongated skull, narrow shoulders, and wide hips that gave him an almost otherworldly appearance. He didn't look like a pharaoh was supposed to look. And perhaps that's why he decided pharaohs weren't supposed to be what everyone thought they were. By his 4th year as ruler, he had begun construction of temples dedicated to a minor solar deity called the Aten, in the very shadow of Amun's greatest sanctuary. The priests watched with growing alarm, but they had no idea what was coming. The first signs of revolution appeared not in proclamations but in art. The rigid, eternal poses of Egyptian sculpture gave way to something startling in its intimacy. Relief carvings showed the royal family beneath the outstretched rays of the Aten, each ray ending in a tiny hand offering life itself. For 3,000 years, Egyptian art had followed strict conventions designed to capture timeless truth rather than temporary appearances. This sudden appearance of genuine human emotion must have shocked everyone who saw it. His queen, Nefertiti, stood beside him in these images, not as a distant figure of majesty but as a living, breathing woman. Their daughters appeared as real children, reaching toward their parents, playing beneath the benevolent gaze of their new god. The names he gave these daughters were theological statements in themselves. Meritaten meant beloved of the Aten. Akhenaten translated as she lives for the Aten. Even in choosing names for his children, Akhenaten was declaring that they existed not merely as royalty, but as living embodiments of divine favor. These names would prove prophetic in ways the young king could not have imagined. The priests of Amun grew restless. For 3 millennia, they had controlled the spiritual life of Egypt. The temple of Amun at Karnak owned more than 80,000 slaves, 420,000 head of cattle, and 900 square miles of agricultural land. The priesthood controlled roughly 1/3 of all cultivatable land in Egypt. By elevating the Aten above Amun, Akhenaten was threatening to disrupt an economic system that had functioned successfully for millennia. But he didn't care about their power. He cared about truth, or what he believed was truth. In his 5th year of rule, Amenhotep IV made a declaration that would echo through history. He would no longer be known by a name that honored Amun. From now on, he would be called Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. His queen Nefertiti became Neferneferuaten. Beautiful is the beauty of the Aten. Even their city would be transformed. But transformation wasn't enough. By his 6th year as Pharaoh, Akhenaten had made a decision that shocked his court and terrified his people. He would abandon Thebes entirely. Somewhere in the desert between Memphis and Thebes, he would build a completely new city dedicated solely to the Aten. He called this place Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten. The site he chose lay on the east bank of the Nile, backed by limestone cliffs that formed a natural amphitheater. As the sun rose each morning, it seemed to emerge directly from these cliffs, creating a daily miracle that reinforced his theology. Construction began immediately, employing tens of thousands of workers. Within 2 years, the basic infrastructure was complete. Palaces, temples, administrative buildings, residential quarters for court officials who had followed their pharaoh into the desert. The great temple of the Aten dominated the city's heart, covering an area of roughly 800 by 300 meters. But unlike traditional Egyptian temples, which were dark, mysterious places where only priests could enter, this temple was entirely open to the sky. No walls blocked the sun's rays from touching every corner of the sacred space. There were no hidden chambers, no secret rituals. The god was the sun itself, visible to all, requiring no intermediaries. In his 9th year as pharaoh, Akhenaten moved his entire court to this new capital. The royal family took up residence in a vast palace complex that stretched for over a mile along the river. Gardens bloomed with flowers imported from across the empire. Aviaries housed exotic birds. For the courtiers who had followed their king to this desert capital, life must have been both exhilarating and unsettling. They were participating in an experiment that had no precedent in human history. But even in paradise, the complexities of royal succession demanded attention. Nefertiti had given Akhenaten 6 daughters, but no son to inherit the throne. In the rigid world of pharaonic Egypt, this presented a crisis that required unprecedented solutions. A pharaoh needed to be recognized by the priesthood, accepted by the military, and capable of maintaining Egypt's international prestige. The problem was made more acute by Akhenaten's religious revolution. Any heir would need to be thoroughly committed to Atenism to prevent a restoration of the old religion after his death. The answer came in the form of arrangements that would have seemed shocking even by ancient Egyptian standards. Around Akhenaten's 12th year of rule, Nefertiti mysteriously disappeared from the historical record. Whether through death, disgrace, or transformation into a co-ruler under a different name, remains one of Egyptology's great mysteries. What happened next is documented in stone reliefs that survive to this day. Images that archaeologists initially struggled to interpret because they seemed so impossible. Akhenaten turned to his daughters to secure his dynasty and maintain his theological revolution. The process began subtly. In reliefs from Akhenaten's later years, his eldest daughter Meritaten begins to appear in positions traditionally reserved for the queen. She stands beside her father during religious ceremonies, receives the life-giving rays of the Aten, and is shown wearing the regalia associated with queenship. By the 13th year of Akhenaten's reign, she had officially become his chief queen, a role that involved both ceremonial duties and the expectation of producing royal heirs. Meritaten was probably about 16 years old when she became her father's queen. Contemporary records provide no insight into her feelings about this arrangement, but try to imagine the psychological complexity of her situation. She had grown up in the revolutionary environment of Akhenaten, surrounded by art and literature that celebrated the intimate bonds of family life. The tender domestic scenes that decorated the palace walls showed her as a beloved daughter playing with her sisters beneath the benevolent rays of the Aten. Now she was expected to transform her filial love into conjugal devotion, to become both daughter and wife to the same man. The theological justification was complex but internally consistent within Akhenaten's religious system. The Aten was described in royal hymns as both father and mother of all creation, containing within itself both male and female principles. The royal family, as earthly representatives of divine power, were expected to mirror this cosmic unity. By marrying his daughter, Akhenaten was creating an earthly reflection of divine self-generation. The practical implications were equally important. Each daughter who became queen could potentially produce the male heir that Akhenaten desperately needed. By keeping succession within his immediate family, he prevented rival branches of the royal house from challenging his theological innovations. Any child born to these unions would be doubly royal, carrying the bloodline of both pharaoh and queen in a concentration of divine power unprecedented in Egyptian history. Meritaten's tenure as chief queen lasted approximately 3 years. During this period, she appears regularly in temple reliefs and diplomatic correspondence, suggesting her role was more than merely ceremonial. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found in the ruins of Akhenaten's foreign office, include references to the king's daughter, the queen, indicating that foreign diplomats recognized her elevated status. Then, around the 15th year of Akhenaten's reign, the situation became even more complex. Meritaten married Smenkhkare, a mysterious figure who may have been Akhenaten's brother, son, or adopted heir. This created an unprecedented situation where the daughter queen became simultaneously the wife of 2 pharaohs, her father Akhenaten and his co-regent Smenkhkare. The arrangement freed Akhenaten to pursue a new marriage that would further concentrate divine power within his bloodline. When Meritaten married Smenkhkare, Akhenaten elevated his next eldest daughter to the position of chief queen, Akhenaten. This young woman, who could not have been more than 13 or 14 years old, found herself at the center of a desperate attempt to preserve her father's revolution through bloodline. Her name, "She Lives for the Aten," proved prophetic in ways that reflected both the hopes and tragedies of the Amarna period. The reliefs showing her beside her father-husband are among the most unsettling artifacts from the Amarna period, depicting a prepubescent girl in the regalia of queenship, standing beneath the rays of the Aten in a pose that mimics the earlier images of Nefertiti. The psychological trauma of this arrangement can only be imagined. Akhenaten had spent her childhood watching her elder sister transform from sibling to stepmother, observing the complex dynamics of a court where family relationships shifted according to political necessity. Now she faced the same transformation herself, expected to abandon her identity as daughter in favor of the more complex role of daughter-wife-queen. The human cost of these arrangements extended beyond the immediate participants. Akhenaten's other daughters lived in a palace where their sisters had become their stepmothers, where the traditional boundaries of family life had been dissolved in service to theological abstraction. These unions were not merely ceremonial. In the tomb of Merir II at Amarna, reliefs show what appears to be Akhenaten in intimate family scenes with his daughter wives, scenes that echo the domestic tranquility depicted in earlier images of his marriage to Nefertiti. The iconography suggests genuine marital relationships rather than purely political arrangements. The death of Akhenaten, another daughter, during this period provides tragic evidence of the physical reality of these relationships. The scenes in the royal tomb showing the death of this young princess are among the most emotionally powerful images in Egyptian art. The royal family is depicted mourning over a woman lying on a birthing bed, with midwives and attendants surrounding the deathbed scene. The presence of a wet nurse holding a newborn infant suggests that Akhenaten died in childbirth, possibly after giving birth to her father's child. Meanwhile, the world beyond Akhenaten was growing increasingly unstable. The Amarna letters reveal a pattern of neglect and confusion in Egypt's international relations. Vassal kings in Syria and Palestine wrote desperate letters begging for military support against invading forces, only to receive no response from the pharaoh who was consumed with his religious experiments and family arrangements. "To the king, my lord, my God, my son," wrote the ruler of Byblos in one of many increasingly frantic dispatches. "If this year there are no archers, then all the lands of the king, my lord, will perish." Similar pleas came from rulers throughout the Levant. But Akhenaten's responses, when they came at all, were vague promises of future support that never materialized. His attention was focused inward, on perfecting his earthly paradise and securing his dynasty through increasingly complex family arrangements. Egypt's enemies noted this weakness and began to probe the frontiers with increasing boldness. The internal situation was equally troubling. The displaced priests of Amun may have gone underground, but they had not disappeared. Archaeological evidence suggests that Atenism never penetrated deeply into Egyptian society outside the royal court. The common people, denied access to their familiar deities, may have maintained traditional religious practices in private while paying lip service to the Aten revolution. As Akhenaten entered the final years of his reign, cracks began to appear in his earthly paradise. Several of his daughters had died, possibly in childbirth, leaving him with fewer potential heirs. The co-regency with Smenkhkare lasted only a few years before that Pharaoh too disappeared from the records under mysterious circumstances. The king who had once proclaimed himself the sole intermediary between heaven and earth found himself increasingly isolated. In his 17th year as Pharaoh, around 1336 BC, Akhenaten died. The circumstances remain mysterious. There is no evidence of violence, no indication of plague, no dramatic deathbed scene recorded by court historians. He may have simply worn himself out in his relentless pursuit of religious perfection, or perhaps the psychological strain of his complex family arrangements and the growing pressures of rulership finally took their toll. His immediate successor was probably Neferuaten, a mysterious figure who may have been Nefertiti ruling under a new name, or possibly one of his daughter queens assuming power in her own right. This shadowy pharaoh ruled for perhaps 2 years, attempting to maintain the Atenist revolution while dealing with the practical problems Akhenaten had left unresolved. But the forces of restoration were already in motion. The child who would become the most famous pharaoh in history emerged from this complex web of family relationships and political intrigue. Tutankhaten was probably 8 or 9 years old when he became pharaoh, and his parentage reflects the genetic complications of Akhenaten's marriage policies. Modern DNA analysis has confirmed that his parents were full siblings, most likely Akhenaten and one of his sister wives. This young boy, barely old enough to understand the forces swirling around him, became the vehicle through which Egypt would abandon the Amarna experiment and return to traditional religion. His wife was Akhenaten, the same Akhenaten who had been elevated to the position of chief queen during Akhenaten's final years. This remarkable woman had experienced the full complexity of the Amarna family arrangements, serving as daughter, wife, and stepmother to various members of the royal house before finally becoming queen to a boy, who may have been her half-brother, son, or nephew. The restoration began almost immediately. Within 3 years of his accession, the boy king had changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, honoring the god Amun, whom his predecessor had tried to destroy. The court abandoned Akhenaten and returned to Memphis, leaving the revolutionary capital to be slowly reclaimed by the desert. A royal decree announced the restoration of the traditional gods in language that explicitly condemned the Amarna period. The temples of the gods and goddesses had gone to pieces. Their shrines had become desolate, grown over with weeds. The land was topsy-turvy and the gods turned their backs upon this land. But the most systematic destruction was yet to come. After Tutankhamun's early death at around age 19 and the brief reign of Ai, the general Horemheb seized the throne and launched a campaign of deliberate historical erasure that was unprecedented in its thoroughness. Every mention of Akhenaten's name was chiseled from temple walls. Every statue bearing his likeness was smashed. The revolutionary capital of Akhenaten was systematically dismantled, its stone blocks carted away to be used in other construction projects. The official king lists compiled in later dynasties simply skipped from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, as if the 18 years of Akhenaten's reign had never existed.